Welcome to DIYing America, where we explore civic hub building throughout the United States and highlight the inspiring people who are weaving and strengthening our civic fabric. Their stories, experiences, and ideas offer valuable insights into how we all can contribute to a stronger, healthier, and more unified America over time. Now, on today's episode, we're going to meet Victoria Hattersley. Victoria holds a Bachelor of Arts in Theoretical Linguistics from the University of Washington, and she is a civic leader and systems thinker dedicated to strengthening United States democracy through collaboration and local empowerment. As a contributor to the Intermovement Impact Project, or IMIP, she promotes efforts of organizations across the nation working for greater civic good and fostering a sense of belonging between local and national pro democracy efforts. Victoria is a local civic hub builder with Better Together America, reimagining democracy at the local level in her home state of Washington. Before that, she spent 19 years in Brexel International, advancing quality management, project management, and organizational learning through clinical trials. Some of her earlier roles included supporting AIDS clinical trials at Harvard School of Public Health and co-owning a small business. Let's get started with DIYing America with Victoria Hattersley. So, Victoria, I've been thinking about the Statue of Liberty. I know on a couple calls that we've had, you've had your Lady Liberty behind, and I wanted to sort of start our chat today talking about that symbolism of the Statue of Liberty. What does that mean to you, and how does that relate to your idea of liberty in general? Have you thought about that at all?
Well, I actually found that statue. I was at Goodwill looking for something, and I found, and I think it was around the 4th of July, but I didn't care that it was 4th of July because I'm on these calls, democracy calls, and it's a little gaudy and it had a bright, shiny thing around her, but she was bold, big, and bold and beautiful. And so I said, okay, that's gonna be my background for my calls. I don't have her right now,
Yeah.
but just she's just so inspiring, right? Because of her message, her very simple message, about bringing the people, all vulnerable people, all sorts of people to our country and welcoming them and giving them an opportunity to develop their future for them and mostly for their children. And my mother certainly was an immigrant from England. And she brought her beautiful culture here as well. So I have a little Brit in me,
Mhm.
but certainly adopted to our cultures. And so there's just so many people that have come. And in my town where I am now, it's very diverse. And
Yeah.
I'm just loving it. And just to see that diversity and what she means for people in welcoming them, but also guaranteeing them their opportunity. And equality. So that's what she means to me.
Nice. I always think about that song. Now, so I'm Gen X, and I always think about Schoolhouse Rock, and there's this lovely Lady Liberty with your book of recipes, and it's still the melting pot idea, which was still common back then, and now we talk about it more as we talk it more about it being a salad bowl. So that the plurality of American diversity is there, right? And we understand that. But for me, it's also just sort of that sense of adventure that I think when one owns their liberty, their sense of identity that I have liberty, I have elements of independence. Obviously, we're talking more from that philosophical, but even what the American experiment in democracy offers us in terms of forging our path forward, that's the liberty piece, right? And so I think about my grandparents who were children of immigrants and the stories that they told, and how we are trying so much to maintain that. I'm going to call it an esprit de corps of democracy that Lady Liberty to me represents. That pulling together, and no matter what the differences, no matter what the backgrounds, when on these shores,
we are Americans, and that always brings a smile. And it also makes me think about the work that's being done right now all across this country. And there's so much wonderful work being done broadly for civic health and wellness. But in specific, as DIYing America does, it focuses in on folks like you who are those hub builders, right? And so I guess kind of going off of where you started, a bit of a biography there in your history. I want to know, in terms of your journey, your life's journey, looking back, particularly on your childhood and maybe into your early adult years as well. Who role modeled or inspired civic action for you in your life?
Oh, I had a couple of really good role models, I'll say. So I was an army brat, traveling all over in Europe and the States as a kid, settled in at 9 in Connecticut. And um, so my dad retired as a lieutenant colonel, and he was a man of incredible integrity and kindness and seeing the value of all people. He had been in Korea and Germany, and he bonded with folks wherever he went, and so he sort of taught me that ethic of integrity, kindness, inclusivity. And my brother, who was 8 years older than me, went off to college when I was 9, so he was at school, and this was during the Vietnam War, the civil
Um,
rights movement.
yeah.
And as a tween, I really wanted to go to all the protests and be involved. And my brother would, very smart guy, and he came home and he would really teach my parents, my military dad, and my British mom, about what the issues of the day were, and explain to them. And he was an activist and going to the protests in Woodstock.
Ah,
And so just seeing that, just hearing those heady conversations as a youngster,
yeah,
amongst my family, and starting being a really fortunate to understand that stuff at an early age. I think
right.
that really inspired me. And the environmental movement was huge at that time. So many changes, right? And I started an environmental club in ninth grade.
Oh,
We were doing recycling, and we planted plants in parks and stuff. And my dad was a member of the Rotary, and
yeah.
I was invited to speak about my starting this environmental club at Hillcrest Junior High.
Ah,
Um,
love it,
and
love it.
I had to speak in front of all these old men,
Oh,
right?
wow,
And
yeah.
just describe and I was terrified, but I wasn't gonna let my dad down. So I
Right.
was able to do it. But so that was sort of my first personal foray out into that world and speaking out.
And that's quite the big risk. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, you're this young, you're a child, you're a young female, and here you are
Yep.
standing up saying, "I'm doing this a little bit." And how did they react? Do you remember?
I was so focused on delivery because also I was sweating under my arms, and I was terrified they would see. So I was really focused on me.
Yeah.
They were polite, they weren't jumping up and applauding, sadly, uh, but not surprisingly. And so I was just happy to have it through, and they did ask me a few questions and thanked me for being there. So my
It,
dad was really proud.
oh, I bet. And it's interesting when you think back on those moments in your life where you took that kind of stepping outside of yourself, having not only being called to a larger call in this case, with what you were doing with the recycling, but sort of stepping outside of your comfort zone, stepping outside of yourself, and where especially at those ages, my goodness, right? And how those moments can get us prepared for other things that come down the line and we don't even know it. One thing back then, right? And how that can improve your gumption or your will or whatever. Did you see that?
Exactly, it definitely gave me a sense of pride that I was invited and I was able to do it.
Yeah, and I think that drives a lot of folks when they know, and especially if you have those experiences at a young age, it does kind of allow you to see, I can make change and I can make meaningful change. And yeah, it might be a small little project, but that's something that I have accomplished for the greater good. And And I think that feeling is slightly addictive. You know, if you feel like you can make change in one area, like maybe I can do this too, you know, and branch out further and see what other skills I can develop through the process. So when you think about the family dynamics, how about like you mentioned, you know, that there was the era of the Vietnam War and, you know, those kinds of things. How much do you think your larger cultural milieu kind of informed that on top of what the family already role modeled?
Well, the music.
Mm.
There are so many songs that I listen to, and I keep intending to put together a playlist because I think they're perfect for now.
Mm.
You know, because we're having struggles, and we need to come together. And so some of those songs are appropriate, but so it was so steeped in the music and the lying. I had a basement. My parents had a basement, and we had painted the walls black, and we had black light, and everybody
Oh,
did
cool.
their artwork all over, our friends. And I would lie on the floor with a big old set of headphones and listen to music over and over. So that was very inspiring and
Yeah, yeah.
influential. And a lot of my friends weren't as engaged because they were sort of younger, but my brother and sister's friends were more engaged.
Mhm.
And so, you know, there was the broader sort of cultural impact there, the news, you know, and things that were happening out in the town and other towns and cities. That definitely informed me. I did try to skip a grade because I was kind of bored in school, and I had to present it was the planetarium and all these white men sitting down, the old white men, and I'm up in the seat, just me. I think I was in 10th grade at that point, ninth or 10th grade, and I had to present to them why I thought I should be able to skip this grade. And they asked me what books I was reading, and I happened to be reading Soul on Ice by Eldridge Cleaver.
Ah,
So that, you know, and I talked about that, which I don't think endeared me to them,
uh,
because they didn't let me do it, but I did it the following year. But anyway, so reading books, there was a book. I was a big reader, and so reading a lot of as well.
yeah. So different things like that. So now, as you transition from those years into your young adulthood, what was your civic journey during those years?
Didn't have much other than navigating being a young mother
Mm.
and without a lot of money.
Yeah.
Married, and had kids early in my early 20s, and then got divorced, and without a lot of you know, there wasn't a lot of support.
Mhm.
And so I was a young mom with, you know, 3 young kids. So I was very fortunate in being able to take care of Head Start, take advantage of Head Start and programs. So I was more of a consumer of the kind of aid that, you know, vulnerable people need versus an advocate at that time because I was so busy. You know, I had to also work and take care of my kids and find, you know, babysitting and all of that. So
Right. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I was pretty much on the consumer end during my early years, even though I stayed connected with the news. I knew what was happening.
Right. Right.
There was an opportunity to do something. I would. I had a job where I was reaching out, doing outreach to the community, trying to
Right.
bring in students to a technical school I was working at. And so I joined the Chamber of Commerce and
Right.
got engaged in that activity. So I had that, but it was more
Right.
from a survival perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's normal for most people in their lifespan of civic develop. You know, their civic lifespan development, we'll call it, right? You know, because when you are doing a type parenting is a type of civic act, right? I mean, you're
Exactly.
preparing the next
Raising good
generation.
children. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and plus, often we do. I know for me personally, it was very much the same way with my daughter. And then as I, you know, as an educator, you know, that's a civic job. That's a job that is civic, you know, highly civic by its own nature. And it sounds like you had that kind of experience too. And I think that's normal for a lot of folks. And I also think that that during those years, there's some invaluable insights that we glean, and that they're not necessarily you know, in our faces at the time, but that as we age, and especially as our children leave the
Oh,
nest, then it's like you start to pull threads together, don't you? You know,
Yeah.
and you're like, now I know where I think this is what I want to do. I mean, and it's definitely happened to me at midlife because here I am doing this work and, this things like this show and all because it's trying to serve the greater wellness for our republic. And so I'm curious then as you continue to age and move through your life, what kind other kinds of civic work did you do? And then I want to get into how did you land on the hubs and being a hub builder?
Um, well, as I did, there was a moment when my kids were little that I was involved. I did volunteer for John Anderson's campaign as an independent because I didn't like
Mm.
either of the two parties. So I was able to do some of that. But later on, once my kids grew older, and I wanted to, I really wanted, I believed in civic engagement, and I wanted to be sure to demonstrate that and involve them in culture and civic engagement, or just demonstrate it, not necessarily um, have them participate. And so I would look for opportunities locally, more like culturally. I joined the community theater and
Yep.
did some marketing for them. And there was opportunities, well, volunteering at schools, and so some that sort of local civic work. And then as the kids got older and actually moved away, I was looking for some way to contribute, and I found the Bridge Alliance. I
Yes.
actually found the Bridge Alliance through a series of other people I had found. I'd read a book and I saw a name, and so I reached out. I looked them up, and I found somebody who was local in Boston. I reached out, um, and they were involved in the bridging community, and they wrote a book called Wedged, and explaining how we're not really as divided as we seem, and it was brilliant. And I also um, read a book called Sacred America, Sacred World, I believe is the name, by Steve Dinnen, more on the spiritual side, that's combining politics and spirituality together. And that was revealing because of the thesis of there's that we need both. We need the tension between the left and the right in order to balance each other, and that this is good. It's creative. It allows for a lot of creativity, and we've
Right.
been working together. Um, so
Yeah.
that so reading again, and through those channels, I found the Bridge Alliance, and so I volunteered for the Bridge Alliance. This is while I was still working.
Right. Right.
I couldn't do too much, but worked with Debbie Lynn and David Nevins for a while
Oh yeah. Yeah.
during those years. And then sadly, my husband got ill, and I had to stop all volunteer work at that time and just focus on him.
Right.
And then he did pass, and I had to go through my grief journey, and I worked that really hard, and eventually was able to then have some energy left to get back into the work. And through
Right.
that, I uh, spoke to Debbie Lynn, but also I was moving out to Washington State from the East Coast, and I
Yeah.
wanted to engage here. And I found Fixed Democracy First by Cindy Black, who's Cindy Black. She does, and so I said, "Ooh, this is local," and so I listened, and that's where I found Walt Roberts and Caleb Christian 3.5 years ago or so, something like.
Yep. Yep.
Uh,
Yeah.
and first Walt spoke, and I lost his contact. I couldn't reach out to him, and then later, 3 months later, Caleb spoke, and between the two of them and their messaging about using systems thinking to bring to coalesce the movement of many movements,
Mhm.
and it was just so exciting for me. I said, these are the people I want to work with. I really want to. And I happened to be going to DC for another meeting, and I met Caleb there, and we spoke, and then and we spoke on the phone, and then I spoke on the phone with Walt. So anyway, I started working with them on the Inter-Movement Impact Project. And
Right.
you know what that is, but it's a organization that's bringing the movement of many movements, the whole ecosystem, the healthy democracy ecosystem, the various elements, sectors, organizations, and giving space for them to weave together their ideas, find unexpected synergies, help lift each other up, and become much more effective and efficient as a movement of many movements.
Right. Right.
And part of that, but part of that is at the national level, fascinating conversations, lovely to see those connections happen.
Mhm.
Um, and one of the projects of that was the local intersections project, which would recognized that we need to have this multi-stranded, Rachel Kleinfeld's multi-stranded, broad-based movement of many movements with a positive vision, concretized at the local level. That's not it exactly, but it gets the spirit. And
Yeah.
uh,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, I would, and so that is where I decided to move next, was to be more locally based.
To focus in on that. And that's how history is made. I mean, in Kleinfeld's analysis, I mean, she's reflecting what, when you look from the historical perspective, this is exactly the process that has to unfold in order for that long-term change to take root and be able to be passed on intergenerationally as well. And you're certainly, following that path. I mean, you have that element of intergenerationality and the role modeling that happened in your childhood. Then as you grew up, you experimented what that looks like for you. And then, of course, in raising your children, you did elements of that to role model for them what that can look like. And, where our kids go with it is up to them. But then, and then kind of re-anchoring, refining yourself after, unfortunately, some loss in your life, to be able to say that I'm still feeling a calling here, and this is where I've landed, and the good I can do, not only by connecting nationally, but also, putting it right where people's feet are. And that's the spirit of hub building, really, right? Is seeing all those different threads of our own life kind of coming into the now of what we can do to, make a better democracy, the better together kind of, for thriving together kind of concepts. and
Mm.
and then also, the where things are at in terms of the actual movements of movement kind of thing going on, and how that all intersects. So what has that journey been like for you? Can you tell us a little bit about, um, that kind of that moment where you said, yeah, I'm going to go do this. And then how has this journey of being a hub builder been, and ups and downs, because we're trying to capture, this is a real experience. People are coming into this from a variety of backgrounds, variety of interest levels, variety of skill sets, but you don't have to be ready for this in any kind of formal sense, right? So what was this journey like for you?
Well, it transformed because it started from the national level, and we were looking at Washington State as a pilot for a
Mhm.
statewide hub. And I was working with Cindy Black, and then some other folks joined our hub coordination team. Um, and it was such an eye-opening experience for me. There was successes, and ultimately we needed to shift focus to the hyperlocal.
Yeah.
So it was very challenging because I was not a grassroots organizer. That's not, I've done professionally in my professional life. I had to bring people together, have teams, create teams. I'm a project manager. You have to know how to, manage teams and bring people together to
Right.
unify and collaborate to create something.
Right.
So that part I was fine with in terms of reaching out to people and explaining the goal, explaining the mission, and there was universal appreciation for what we were trying to do. Because I would get referrals from Cindy and from other people, and I would do some calls, Cindy as well,
Right.
to explain and to try to bring people together from different parts of the state, and
Yeah.
transpartisan, nonpartisan, from different political views.
Mhm.
And but it was pretty much at an organizational level, bringing different organizations together. And so we were able to do that. However, we didn't have funding,
Yeah.
and so over time, that Cindy and the other folks were volunteers, and they had actual jobs, and so um, the priorities of those jobs shifted. So they had some changes where they weren't able to provide as much time, as well as they're very busy during the legislative sessions. That was a very practical issue where they really couldn't support. And me not being that person that understands all the nuance of the state and what's going on and what the history is of civic engagement and political change. Um,
Yeah.
I didn't have that skill to be able or the time, nor
Yeah.
did I
Yeah.
intend on spending the amount of time that it would take to do that. And the final thing was there's this beautiful project at Washington State called the Project for Civic Health that's a project that's led at the state level from the governor's office. And
Gotcha.
so that, we're looking at that, like the last thing anyone wants to do is reinvent the wheel and overlap and compete for volunteers or
Yep.
funding or any of those things. We want to collaborate and lift each other up and complement and not compete.
And
And
not completely.
so that project was still getting launched, and we didn't really want to pursue something that might can have a competitive goal. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we so we we had slowed that process down, and my focus then was no longer with that project. Together America is an organization that was growing up, and I was working very closely with them, and so that's where I have put my time, working with them both on the infrastructure and resource side of things. And being a project manager, I love lists, I love spreadsheets, I love templates, I love the SOPs, processes. And
Right.
so, and
Right.
I did all that in my career. And so I was really game to contribute there,
Yeah.
um, because Better Together America is a national organization looking at incubating and supporting civic hubs all over, local
Right.
civic hubs. And they can be at the town, at the county, at the state level, whatever is going to work for the people there.
Right.
So and just having moved to this town where I am, it made perfect sense that I wanted to understand the civic structure and what was going on for me
Right.
to do that work. And so right now I'm in the middle of stepping back and able to document my journey of doing this work and able to create the tools that might be helpful to others that are in the same stage.
Right.
So
Right.
starting an assessment for me, understanding what's the need is, not parachuting in and saying, "Oh, I'm going to give you
Right.
all this."
Right.
It's
It,
understanding what the need is from the people here.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that in my discussions with folks who are doing kind of either hub building or related type of work, it's kind of an interesting phenomenon that I'm hearing that there's a sort of almost, I don't know if I call it a catch-22 or not, but it's almost like some folks when you approach them about things at the local level, they want to know what your product is. They just, what are you going to be able to give me? And when you tell them, well, we're co-developing it together, they're like, yeah, let me know when you got it done and I'll circle back with you. And then there are those who love the idea of, oh, we're gonna be developing this out from our own, and here figuring out what issues or what problems, etc. So it's interesting to see. I mean, I'm sure there's other variations on that theme, but in my conversations with folks and even some of my own personal experiences has taught me there's folks that want that product, like you're like almost like you're stepping off the shelf on the store. Like, here's what we're gonna do. Here's the product. Here's this. And then those that are more interested in, okay, this is the journey, right? The journey of developing these hubs or whatever it might be that a community is trying to achieve around what its real needs are. So did you run into any of that in your time as you were working on things there?
Actually, no. I have had universal people that I've spoken to locally and explain the thought process. How do I sign up? How do I
Oh, nice. Yeah, yeah.
So, and, I've had and it's gonna take me a lot of time because I'm gonna be recruiting my hub coordination team
Right.
once it's clear that this is something that makes sense. But right now, I just need people to give me that information, and people have been, very interested. I was talking to someone I attended the first mayor's coffee hour in
Ooh, nice.
and there was like 30 people there. I was impressed. And he wanted to know what everybody's questions were. And a lot of them were about, oh, when are we going to get a sidewalk here? And when's the bridge going to get fixed? And what potholes and so on. And so I raised my hand. I said, well, I'd like to know your assessment of the civic engagement uh,
Mm,
in Mount Vernon. Like, how do you think that's going? And so And so when he got to my question, he made his speech, and one woman said, and she said, but there's this thing, and da da da, da, and 6 people chimed in for this discussion. They were like, but yeah, but we didn't know about that town meeting, and it's so lots of people, but they were the ones that showed up. So of course they're civically engaged, right? But this question just sparked a lot of discussion.
That's
And
fascinating
so
thing, yeah. So the energy kind of got sparked around just that simple question of what are we doing locally as far and what is the level of civic engagement that we feel in this community? That's a real powerful question, and one that I think I'm gonna adopt that actually for some of my discussions. I think it's really cool because it gets you thinking. Because we talk about civic engagement, we don't always self reflect on our own journey per se, and we certainly don't necessarily, like you said, we don't always know what's going on, even 2 blocks away, kind of thing. So, and I'm sure some of the elements of the modern world, 21st century world, have blocked us from, especially the pandemic and things, from feeling some of those connections that allow us to have that awareness. And I know local journalism is so important for that as well. So it seems like though that in your area there's an interest and there are some tools available at the local level, but then of course there's the whole network of the Better Together support framework that is there for hub building. So given that in those pieces in mind, and understanding that, like most of the hub builders at this point, with this show, what we're trying to do is capture this journey. So we'll have you back on, of course, as we go along. But what would you say are some of your short-term hopes for what you want to see happen with the hub building? I mean, obviously there's the kind of we want to get a hub going, but assuming that's occurring, that the hub is up and going, well, when you get to that point, tell me about some of your vision for that. What do you hope for short-term and long-term in terms of the effects of this hub building work on your community, and even if this takes off nationally, how the national scene could look.
well, the first thing I would say is I want a hub if it's necessary. That's the
Yeah.
first step. Um, there's the League of Women Voters is really stepping up their engagement in civic and in partnering with other organizations. So this idea of bringing organizations together, partnering is really growing. I've heard it in several conferences I've been to, and it's out there in the ether, and it's catching on.
Right.
People are recognizing that partnering and working together and synergy um, is what's needed. So I want to understand. I am already a member, and I need to engage more with the league and what they're doing. Rotary is
Oh,
doing Democracy in a Box, and they have starting their whole in civic engagement effort. And I really am going to get connected with Rotary.
nice.
So we're going to look at that, and my future team. The first thing is get more people together so we can meet that bring different skills, fundraising and knowledge, and that's important to define the needs that you have for your team, your skills, just like any team building, right?
Right. Yeah, keep working us through those steps as you see them.
Well, getting that team together, and then being able to reach out and assess what the needs are in the community,
Mhm.
what the organizations are. Because my vision is there's all these national or statewide organizations, then they have chapters, and they're in the community, the YMCA, Community Action, the Kiwanis Club, the Rotary Club. So mediation
Yep.
centers, there's 24 all over the state of Washington, and they know what's going on in the community. They have their pulse right on the community. So in being able to engage, looking at that and seeing if that makes sense, having discussions with people, if we bring those guys together just to do the assessment and
Right.
understand where do we think and talk to the electeds, the mayor, the
Yep.
city council. I've attended city council meetings, the county councilmen, so council people. So doing that initial outreach, I don't know how long that's going to take. This is a
Right.
new path, right? Um,
Yep.
and so doing that assessment, bringing the people together. I already have some meetings set up, so that's just I don't want to do this on my own. I am not the boss of this. I need my collaborators. That's how
There
I
you
felt.
go. There you
I
go.
needed people to
Yes.
brainstorm and do things. Not,
Do it.
so
Well,
that,
and that's a key point, I think, in all of this, because one of the things, and I know from just, oops, sorry about that, and knowing some, from my own efforts in certain ways on these fronts, it can get kind of where the risk is that people will see you as the person, and you don't want to be the person, because in fact, for a lot of what I hear, with the whole building of a hub or any kind of grassroots building is how do you shift that focus from I am kind of being the instigator to the we, and that seems like that's going to be part of that process, though, as you start to identify community problems or challenges that the hub would like to work on. I think that's where the letting go of the I and moving into that we element has to be really like the hub builder who initiates the initiator has to be ready and hopefully is very willing to kind of go a little bit, and yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And I have a full life of children and grandchildren,
yeah, yeah,
other things going on. So um, this is going to come from a place of joy and purpose and community and collaboration. Um, and it has to, yeah, I do not want to be the leader of this. There's no hierarchy here.
mhm,
It's horizontal. And everybody digs in and with, who wants to. It's a
right,
coalition of the willing. Uh, and,
exactly,
s- and so I'm looking forward to seeing how that unfolds and what it looks like. It's an unknown right now.
yeah,
But my hope is that there's something that comes out of it that helps people get more engaged and engage. We are a purple county. We're red in the east and more blue on and we need to engage.
right, right,
But from a broader perspective,
yeah,
um, I would love for these civic hubs that are getting developed, and we're going to, bring that into there'll be a sort of umbrella of being able to share um,
mhm,
strategies and problem solve tools and so on. But this work, along with all the other work that's happening to bring together these various movements,
yeah,
um, first of all, the practical impact on the local communities. That my hope is for the practical impact to be beneficial to all the, especially vulnerable people that have not been brought into the conversation, and make sure that their needs are getting met.
yeah,
Um, that happens. But the other side of this, June, is
yeah,
um, so here's a story. I went to a wedding and I was talking to somebody and I was telling them what I do, somebody I didn't know. And it was a man and I was telling what I do. And he looked at me, he said, "Oh my God, I've got to get my wife. I've got to bring my wife. She needs to hear this." So he called his wife. He said, honey, you got to hear what this woman says. She said, "Tell her." So I told her about this. And she wept. She said, "I had no idea any of this work was going on."
right,
So
right, yes,
if you go to
yeah,
a soccer game, you explain what you're doing there to go, "Wow, that's amazing. Oh, I'm
yep,
so happy to hear that." So nobody knows that tens of thousands of organizations, millions of people,
yep,
huge amount of work being done and people don't know. Right. So that's a problem. That's a
that
messy
is,
problem. We got to solve that. So that's a big hope that we give this wonderful message to nonpartisan message to
yep,
all, everyone, and that they understand this is happening. And second, we have to give them very simple on ramps to
yep,
civically engage. The people at my tavern where I go dancing on Sunday nights, when I tell them, they're so excited. I want to help. They came and postcarded with me and they want to join, but they don't know how. Right.
right,
And I know there's a lot of work that Bridge Alliance has Citizen Connect, but we are failing them in our messaging. We, as the healthy democracy ecosystem people working on
right,
it, right?
I,
We got to figure that out. And I know a lot of people are working hard to figure it out and get it on social media. And I know there's a lot of work happening, but we just have to really prioritize that. And
yeah,
because
and I think a lot
we
of
get
that
off
comes
ramp.
through, yes, and I think a lot of that comes through the relational, and that's where it gets more challenging because you don't know everybody in the world. And so, the more that I've had similar conversations going on, and of course, as you know, I kind of try and just be sort of an advocate for that awareness piece in general in a lot of the work that I do, including with this show. And I think that focus on that on-ramp idea, the simplicity of the on-ramp has to be there. Again, meeting people where they're at,
Yep.
and not trying to lead but not dictate, right? Show the
Off
opportunity path. More of a Pied Piper or a town crier, which is how I look at it. Every movement needs its town criers.
prior, right.
Or that Lady Liberty with her torch.
I love that.
You
And
know,
the thing is, we got to give them the opportunities for the short term, the midterm, and the long term. Our hub building is the long term. We have to have the long game. We have to make it sustainable. So it's
yeah.
not every election we're in this. So we have this sustainability. We create civic engagement, but that's a long game. So
And
we also have the short game and the mid game, though.
and the mid game and all of that, of course, you're looking at people's time. So everything, like you said earlier, there has to be an element of a nod of how you make this, that old adage, how to eat an elephant. Nothing against elephants here, but one bite at a time. And I think that taking that mindset into hub building seems to be very helpful to people. In the sense that if we could just chunk a little bit, chunk a little bit, chunk a little bit, and find where people are at, how this is fit into their lives. But the art is not, as you kind of were saying earlier with your other example, the art is not losing that momentum, right? And that's where the financial resources are going to have to, we do need people, funding some of these projects, helping to, be part of the resources that enable this work to be done in communities across this country. And, I certainly hope more of that comes. I'm hearing some good news out there that there is more of an impetus for people to donate to this kind of work, and so that's a good sign of the potential for longevities if we can start seeing those loops close in a way where it brings the funding, brings the support resources, because it obviously starts off with people's time more so than it starts with them.
And
Yeah.
and June, I really want to help other people not have the stress that I had, because I felt like I was failing, just because I couldn't do enough. And that's the wrong way to do this work, right? I mean, and I've had a whole mental shift there, recognizing, I'm a volunteer and I'm doing what I can, and I will, and it doesn't have to be done yesterday. And
Yeah. Yeah.
allowing that time and just making it reasonable, having self-compassion, very important in this work.
Yes, because the impetus to get things done, or the get her done thing, and I'm sure a lot of people come to this line of work already have that get her done kind of vibe, but you're right, that element of self-compassion becomes so important, and recognizing where your actual spheres of influence are, so
Mm,
that you're welcome. Those conversations are welcome. They're not seen as, like you were saying, almost trying to. You don't want it to be like you're trying to tell people how to live their lives in their own communities, and to build that rapport. So yeah, that's wonderful advice for sure, to keep yourself and that balance that we all have to work on in our lives, and no matter what stage of life we're in, that balance between the doing and the being of our existence as humans, and self-care. So awesome on that. So I have one last question for you, but before we get to that, is there anything else you'd like to share? I mean, here you are, you've had different I want you started the process, but it's had different, fits and spurts, let's
and
say, right? And in that capacity, you're learning some lessons. Is there anything that you'd like to share further about the lessons you've learned, both from your life's journey, but also more specifically to the hub building, or to anybody who might want to do this?
well, yes, I have been formulating more of a front end plan. So really lay out sort of how you think you should proceed, and make sure you have the resources to do that before you get started, because if you don't, you're going to get stressed, and I don't want to have fits and starts with the people I'm working with. So I've learned I'm not going to get fully started. I've told people this is what's happening and there's excitement,
Yeah, yeah.
but I haven't started, like, I haven't said, okay, we're, because I'm not ready yet. And I don't
Right.
want to commit to something and then stop. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? And then start, like fits and starts, like you said. I want to have a pretty good plan and a pretty good team and understand what we're trying to do. Um, and,
Yes.
and, and, and we'll go from there,
And on that front, Better Together had some gatherings.
Oh
Um,
my gosh, yes.
yeah. So can you tell us about that at all?
Oh, we had a workshop and it was fantastic. It was our first workshop as a organization. We'd had a lot of calls and identifying a lot of work people did identifying hubs that already existed, then say, are you interested in joining other hub builders? And many were, and then other people that are just starting just a democracy drinks, just a social thing. So people in all different phases across the country, two in Nebraska that didn't know that each other were there, which was cool.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, they're going to work together now, but they're in the heart of the country, they're on the coast, they're everywhere. So we had a workshop and they did such an amazing job pulling together a training program, and it was a very active participation. It was just so lovely to actually be in person. So you can't underestimate that in person, the value there. So we had 2.5 days of connecting and learning and working together in different tabling and just getting to know your other folks and identifying people that you want to work with going forward and starting to create plans and understanding fundraising and what they're offering to support that. So it was just so valuable to all of us, and just to be able to collaborate. And everybody's got, people had the same sort of issues. Some people had the same sort of issues I had, is they've really struggled, and others are already 4 years in, and so they give you a vision of where you can go.
Where you could go. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important because this is very doable. And I think the goal that I've seen with our Better Together crew is about that, empowering people to do that work and to see that they're not alone in their hearts, and they're not alone in the journey that they're going to undertake by being such a significant, well, being the change we want to see.
Yes. Yes.
Said often, but it's so true.
It's
All
so
right,
true.
so speaking of all of that, so now wibbly wobbly, timey spacey kind of stuff. I want you to imagine that it's 100 years from now or something like that. And I give at the end of every episode, I like to give my guests the opportunity to kind of send a message to the future, because there's that whole element of for ourselves and posterity, and that we're doing this for the long term. Yes, we hope to make positive impacts on the present. That's normal, that's human. But sometimes we do forget that there are going to be generations that are going to look to whatever it is we're doing. They're going to pick it apart, they're going to dissect it, they're going to go this way or that way with it. But what I'm sure we all will agree on is that we hope to leave them with hope, that they can point back and say, well, here are the people that tried this and did that. They're inspiring me in my now, because democracy requires constant maintenance, right? And to be a good participant in our republic, you've got to get civically engaged. That's totally one of the lessons of our era, is that oops, we got a little less civically engaged than we should have done in American history. So in taking some of that lesson and going, all right, well, now we're kind of trying to make amends here, history, for the future generation. I want you to imagine, like, I don't know, some future eighth grader, sitting there going, they did what in the early 21st century, of this big movement of movements, which I like to call the United States Civic Wellness Movement. You can call it Civic Health Movement, whatever you want to call it. But that there's going to be a chapter heading in that textbook that's going to identify that this is what Americans did for their republic in this era, and what lessons could be learned. But I guess the message I want to add, what message would you leave to them? What would you want them to know about these efforts and the hopes that you have in relationship to these efforts? I mean, what's kind of the message you want a future student to know? Long question.
Maybe it would be contrasting, picking out certain things that are going on now that hopefully aren't going on then, and saying, this is what it was like when people weren't engaging. And this is what happens when people don't engage in their democracy or realize that they have a voice. One of these, I went to an event, a hub where the people had been given, it's a hub in South Carolina, and North Carolina, sorry. And she came up to me and she was crying. She said, she took me by the shoulders and said, I didn't know I had a voice. I didn't know I had a voice. And this hub showed me I had a voice. And that woman was now learning how to lobby and actually going to her state government to lobby. And
Yeah.
I mean, what a switch from having no voice, feeling like you were unseen. So doing that contrast, saying this is what happens, and this could happen again unless we continue our civic engagement. And, you know, at that point, hopefully it's in the schools, and
Right.
and that they're just expected, you know, maybe there'll be mandatory voting, or I don't know. But anyway,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
they will see how it was, just like we can look back and see how it was with no work safety rules and you know, all the so many things 100 years
Yeah.
ago. So that's what I want, and I want a safe planet, and I do all the work I do is to save our planet, because if we don't have
Yeah.
the planet's going to be fine eventually.
Eventually. Yeah. Yeah.
Just,
Exactly.
just yeah.
Exactly. Well, Victoria, thank you so much. It's always a joy to be with you. And one of these days we are going to meet in person. We've worked together now for quite some time, and it's just always a treat to talk with you and see where things are going. We will definitely be following the situation out there in Washington in terms of what you're building and growing. So be ready. You're going to come back on. We're going to hear more of the stories and
Okay.
where it is, where the journey has taken you, and we'll
Mhm.
keep doing those updates so that people can understand that this is an act, it's a civic act, but it's also a very personal journey that we undertake when we engage this way. So thank you again. And to our viewers, thank you so much for joining us on DIYing America again. This program is produced by the Waging Dialogue Project in collaboration with Better Together America, and we look forward to seeing you next time on DIYing America.